Hello, today I am joined by my guest, Stuart Young from Etive. Stuart, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much, David. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
Stuart, today we're here to sort of talk about how we're all trying to do our bit to make the process of buying and selling homes easier, more streamlined, more efficient. I think it's fair to say that there's a great deal of sort of challenges that face agents, but also on the ground, buyers and sellers every day. Um, and for years, the process of buying and selling a house in the UK has remained pretty much the same. We get a few mod cons here and there, but generally speaking, the process has been the same. And I think there's a general feeling that there are ways that we can improve this. And one of the ways that we can improve this is improving the level of transparency and information that we're able to offer upfront to people right from the outset of a transaction, rather than have that sort of process where a solicitor is having to pull that information out of the other side slowly but surely, and it's almost, it reads like a mystery novel until you get to the end, and when you get that report on title, we finally know where we are with it all. And I think that there's a lot of work that is being done around that. So you've got something which is, as a property logbook, which is absolutely phenomenal. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, the property logbook came about when I was buying a house back in 2000, actually. And it was an old property, and it was a very protracted process. And it was simply down to, because it's such an old property, of lack of information. And whether I was just being a buyer. I was looking for information about the property as we were going through the transaction, stuff around what had been done to the property and not done to the property. And then there are issues with access rights because there was kind of a bit of common land. It was an old property, and over the years, bits had been built here and there. And it was very, very frustrating because, in my view, back in the day, in 2000, I felt that the estate agency that was used and the conveyancers that we used hadn't really prepared all the information. And that led to a very long, protracted transaction. It could have been far more efficiently done if all the information had been pulled together. So it wasn't until 2006 when the opportunity arose where I thought, I think I might try and do something about this and set up this concept of a property having a logbook.
Yeah.
And taking into account, even in those days, it sounds kind of showing of age here, but 2006, the internet really hadn't been used that often in home buying and selling, or in the property
Yeah.
market. We created a digital record of a property and called it property logbook. And the intent was that a property, once it goes through a transaction, because it's a defining point in the life cycle of that property, that everyone agrees on the information that is provided so that I can buy your house that you're selling to me. So that means everyone trusts and relies on the information at that point in time. So I was thinking, well, if you created a logbook at that point in time, then if I were to sell in the future, there's a lot of information there that will help a future estate agent, conveyancer, and indeed potential buyer
Yeah.
when they're making a purchasing decision. And
I
that's how it came about.
I'm smiling because I've got 20, 25, 26 years of selling houses experience, and I've obviously had the pleasure of selling houses for people sort of several times over. So I've sold them a house and then I've gone back to sell it for them again. And when we revisit it, you'd be surprised at how everybody sort of sits around scratching their head again, going, oh, I wonder where this document is, and I wonder where that record is. And some people can't even remember the solicitor that they
Yeah.
used to purchase it. The amount of times that people panic and go, I don't know where my deeds are, for instance, and on all of that, particularly if they've been in a property for an awful long period of time. So it makes perfect sense to everybody that there should be a single reference point that we can all stick to, because generally speaking, and I know there are twists and turns in every sale that make them unique, we wouldn't like them otherwise. We like a challenge, but there are twists and turns to every sale that make them unique. But generally speaking, we do try and follow a standardized format, so it makes sense to have that information presentable. So this is music to my ears, and I think it'll make a lot of people that process of selling the house a little less traumatic. But when it comes to sort of keeping your finger on the pulse of what changes are needed and what changes would add value to that process of buying and selling houses, where do you take that information from? Because we all read the industry press, and it's a combination of PR articles, advertising, and general news. If you were to look at the wider press, you don't often get a balanced view of what's happening in the property market. So it's so hard to sort of get that barometer. You can't speak to every agent in the country, presumably. So where do you get your info from?
Oh, that's a good question, David. And you know yourself, it's so difficult to try and keep on top of everything that's happening and keeping your eye on the, if I can use that cliche, the pulse of what's happening. And I think it's, we're involved, we're a participant within a group called the Home Buying and Selling Group, which I've been involved for about 3-4 years, been inputting into that. It's an informal group of the industry. And I think if you look at the contributors and participants within that, you've got from the legal sector, the likes of the Law Society and Conveyancing Association, but very importantly, you've actually got practicing conveyancers in there. Within the estate agency sector, you've got the likes of Property Mark and, of course, practicing estate agency groups in there as well. There's RICS and RPSA representing surveyors. And then you've got people like us who are suppliers to the industry across a whole raft of different areas. And I think the meetings that are held by the Home Buying Selling Group, which are fairly regular, allow that neutral forum for the sharing of ideas and collaboration. And I think, home buying and selling, you've probably read this quite a lot, David. It's quite a fractured industry, quite a fractured process, and there's a lot of talk about we need to get this stakeholder group working closer with this stakeholder group. So I think the Home Buying Selling Group helps to support that and bring that collaboration together. And importantly, for companies like ourselves who are suppliers to the industry to work in open collaborative environments with conveyancers and lawyers, estate agents, surveyors, whoever else is involved. So I think that I find that group particularly useful because it is a neutral forum and environment for that, and generally good open discussion, to be honest.
I think it's so important because you're right. As small as our industry is, sometimes when you tot it up in terms of the general size of it, when you compare it to other massive industries, yes, we pale into comparison, but we are, for our size, quite disparate sometimes. We're separate. We have different factions, different interest groups that represent different members, and it's nice to see that there is this collaborative effort to sort of try and bring everybody together with only one goal, which is to improve that process for not just for agents, not just for surveyors or mortgage brokers or anybody else along the way, but it's actually the dare I say it, the Joe Public that benefit from this. Your average home buyer and seller that is going to have a better experience, and I think in turn that makes our jobs a lot easier. So talking about making our jobs a lot easier, let's get back to the property logbook. So you've explained where the concept came from, and that's great. So as an estate agent, in practice, how do we sort of implement this, and where are those benefits for our customers, and where do you suggest that an agent starts with it?
Yeah. Well, the way we've designed our solution, obviously, I'm talking about ourselves, and there are obviously other kind of logbook providers out there who tackle it in slightly different ways. But our approach has been really to make it as simple as possible. So if an estate agent said, I'm selling One Acacia Avenue, we just create a logbook. We need very basic details that enables us to create a logbook against that property. That's it up and running. And then we work with the agent and any of their partners and their client to start to populate that with relevant information about the property with, in this instance, the intent to support the transaction of that property is, for the benefit of the industry, never mind the customer. This is by making it easier operationally for the estate agent. So it's a very simple process to set up, and that's why we've always operated. We don't require companies to technically integrate, because that can be time consuming, expensive, it doesn't always work, it creates greater reliance. So our pitch from that perspective is like, you give us a property, we'll create a property logbook. Now, the industry that we've worked across, we've worked with some companies where we're creating, I don't know, 2 or 3 logbooks a week or something like that, just depending when the properties come on the market, to the opposite end of the spectrum, where the most logbooks we've created in one go was actually for a local authority, and we created 15,000 logbooks in 3 days. So we did 5,000 a day in 3 bite-sized chunks. So my point is, it can deal with scale. So if you're a big agency, we can manage the scale. But if you're the small agency, niche focused agency, it doesn't matter. It still benefits you as well.
So typically speaking, if I'm an agent looking to sort of integrate this into our processes and do I introduce the concept of a property logbook right from the get-go at valuation stage when I'm visiting a customer at home? How are we best to sort of integrate it into our processes?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I would always advocate for the agent to do that at the outset. I don't think people always appreciate, when I say people like me, consumers, home buyers and sellers, we probably don't always appreciate what work an estate agent is doing in the background, because it's not always that visible, So you can understand why some people kind of feel, oh, all the estate agent does is they stick it up on a portal and that's it. They don't always appreciate all the other work. So what we suggest to estate agents is to use the logbook at that outset. So if I'm speaking to Mr. and Mrs. Smith and they're selling their property, the logbook is put together in the context for marketing about the communication they're saying to the client. Look, it's a comprehensive digital platform. It's a centralized repository of information. It's essential information related to your property, and it's very much designed to enhance the marketing efforts that the estate agent is doing for the client of their property. So it can help the agent really stand out and say, we're going that extra little bit. Here's why our service is just different or better. We really want to market your property as best as possible. We want to present it into the market as best as possible to potential buyers. So that initial education piece that helps the agent differentiate their service and product. And very importantly, understanding it's supporting their activities. It's not replacing. You can't replace that activity. And I think my impression is sometimes people think that technology is there to try and replace, but you're not. Home buying and selling is such an emotional and emotive process, and it is about people dealing with people. So it's important to stress that this technology is just there to help the agent market the property and present the property in the most favorable and informative light. I go back to my experience of when I was trying to buy, all I wanted was more information about the property. But the toing and froing of chasing delayed the transaction. So the estate agent, the conveyancer, delayed getting their fees.
So I mean, ultimately, I dare say that you sometimes hesitate to sort of make these claims, but ultimately, the net result of introducing something like a property logbook from really the outset of the selling process is that it should lead to reduced transaction times. It should cut out the propensity of a property to reach a fall through, because as you said, you're waiting for information, you want more information. What happens if you get a piece of information that actually is so problematic that for you it's a deal breaker and you can't get over it? So we do know that there are fall throughs as a result of that, but we also know that, and I always say this to my customers, if I'm going out visiting them at home and they'll say, well, where do we advertise the property? And you may choose websites such as, and there are more, but you could say Rightmove, Zoopla, On the Market, you name it. There are tons of them. Now, a portal, when you're selling your property, is your best friend, because it's telling the world, my house is for sale, come and get it. But when you've agreed a transaction, it flips to being your worst enemy, because it's still filling your buyer's inbox with great properties that they could be looking at every day. The search for them doesn't just stop. So I think selling a house in 2023 means that somebody's head can get turned so much more easily mid-transaction. So it's about providing enough information to keep them invested in the process, but also to keep that momentum going. And I think being transparent from the outset is part of that process, because it really sort of demystifies. Not a lot of buyers, average buyers, will tell you that they truly understand what a solicitor does in the conveyancing process. And believe it or not a lot of agents can tell you exactly what they do. But if we were to demystify it and say, look, these are the questions that come up, this is the information that are needed, these are the points that your buyers, your future buyers, are going to be looking at as well, I think we're doing everybody a massive favor, aren't we?
I think there's two interesting points you make there, David, and I think getting people to understand the benefits of something like this. A logbook can benefit the professionals that are involved in the transaction, and they quite often need access to very specific information to facilitate that transaction. The consumer, the buyer, wants something totally different. They're not interested in the title or the title plan. That's the reality of it. What they want to know is, it's got a nice kitchen, it's got a nice bathroom, garden, double garage, and they want to know about the physical attributes of the property. A good estate agent will, well, typically a buyer will know about the location that they're moving into. They know about the schools and stuff like that. But when it comes down to the property, so this allows the agent to meet their specific need in terms of what does an agent need to market a property, and they'll know what grabs the buyer's attention. But then when they're working with the client, a potential buyer, they're dealing with that client in a different way, that buyer giving them the information that they want and need to help them make that quicker decision. And, you know, if I go back to my personal experience, I was looking for stuff around the warranties, around the dry rot, and it was an old property, so I needed the certificates around the dry rot work and damp coursing that had been done by the central heating system. That's what the buyer wants, you know. I wasn't interested in title plans and access plans when I bought the property, but the conveyancer, on both sides, the solicitors need that, and the estate agents need that. So I think you've touched on a good point there by getting people to understand they can use this as a tool to support them as professionals, which is one aspect, and then the customer, the client on the other side of it. Does that make sense?
And it's great timing, because there is that shift at the moment within our industry in terms of legislation as well, the provision of upfront information, which previously was a serving suggestion, if you like. You either gave more information or you didn't, but agents weren't necessarily having to do it as a matter of law and a matter of fact. We now have been told that we need to up our game in terms of what we state openly about a property at the outset of a transaction, and the information that is given even before a solicitor gets involved. So this really, property logbook really comes into it at that key point, and I think the timing is great, and timing is everything.
Well, I think the industry, you know, as well as I do, the general stats are, is it approximately 27% of transactions fail, or is it 30%? It's a very high figure.
Significant figure, isn't it?
It is. And I think as an industry, we seem to accept that, which is, it seems crazy to me. So anything that can help chip away at that, you know, this is just one tool to help that process, to help that reduction in failed transactions. Because what we found in our experience is, if you provide as much of the information as you can early in the process, it reduces the opportunity for the potential buyer or their conveyancer to cause delays by saying, oh, I need this information now, or I need that information now. If you put it all up front, then you've got the buyer has access to everything they need, and very importantly, their solicitor will have access to everything they need. So it stops all that toing and froing.
So in terms of who this is available to, I'm presuming it's available to all agencies of of every size, both big and small. But more importantly, what is the cost that's attached to it, Stuart?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is available to that small agency that's doing 2 properties a week, right up to the big ones. We provide logbooks to estate agents, conveyancers, house builders, new home builders, and as I alluded to earlier on, even to local authorities. We've done it there as well. We charge a very simple flat fee. It's £22.50 plus VAT per logbook.
It's affordable. It's not a massive upfront cost. And how do you suggest that agents deal with that? Do you see agents sort of recharging that to a client as part of their upfront costs, or is this something that you would recommend that agents work into their marketing package, for instance?
I think it's entirely up to the agent in terms of how they're dealing with their client, but they're the ones that will be able to make a far better judgment call on the client that they're dealing with, and maybe the way that they operate. There's absolutely no reason why they can't push that cost back onto the client. It's perfectly reasonable, I think, because they're doing additional work into that. If they want to carry it as their own fee, that's up to them. The one thing I can say, which might help agents, is albeit it was quite a few years ago, we actually paid an agency to go in and do, it was a market research agency, to go and do some customer interviews. And it was on a new build development because simply it was a lot easier to do there because we were able to get all the customers at the one time. So we got a very good random. And one of the questions was, would you pay for this? And I can't remember the exact figure, but most of them all said they would gladly pay for it because they saw the benefit to them, not just in their initial purchase, but when they came to sell in the future. So even the client could see, because they'd just gone through the painful process and exciting process of buying a property, but they could see the potential value to them later on when they came to sell.
Because I presume what you're saying is that the property logbook at the end of the transaction actually belongs to the homeowner as opposed to the agent. So if they choose to sell again in the future, they've still got access to that information. They're free to choose an agent, even if it's not the original agent that sold them. And that information is personal to them rather than to the agent that initially gave it to them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a very good point, David. And how we work it is, so I buy a property through David Mint's estate agencies. We brand it as David Mint's estate agents, because what we're saying to agents is saying that you could actually potentially use this to just continue very softly a relationship with those people so that when they come to sell in the future, you're right, they go into their logbook, it's private to them, it's their logbook, it actually belongs to the property, and they'll see your brand sitting on it, your contact details, your information. So we hope that the client has had a good experience with that agency. They now remember who the agency was, because as you said earlier on, sometimes you forget who it was you might have used. So your branding is there with the agent, and hopefully that triggers a positive message to the customer, the client. Go, yeah, I bought it from them. They provided me with this. I think the important thing to point out here, David, is if you created a logbook for a client and you were selling the property, at the point of completion, there's a technical couple of buttons you click that hands over the logbook to the new owner. And what our system does in the background, it creates a duplicate copy. So the client has their own copy and you have a copy for 10 years, but it's only got information up to the point of sale.
Yes.
So at least you've got something. Now, the client might update their own logbook, they might do other stuff with it, that's okay, but it provides both parties with a separate copy.
Okay, that's really, really useful and interesting because, again, once I've bought the property, I might put an extension on it, I may apply for planning permission, and presumably I've got somewhere good that I can keep that information so it can go straight into the property logbook, which is super useful when I come to sell it. Now, I think the concept of a property logbook is great, and I think the concept of more upfront information, it just makes absolute sense. It's logic, but also we know, because there are stats to prove it, that it actually does reduce transaction times. It reduces the number of fall throughs. Within the world of auction, upfront information has been there for many, many years. And again, you know, facilitates quicker transactions. We know this, it's been tried and tested. But very often within our world of property, sometimes there are new solutions and products that come up, which are great for us as agents, but in order for them to actually pick up and really sort of succeed and to get taken up properly by an industry, you need wider key players to stakeholders, as it were, to start to use those systems as well. So we've talked about how agents would be using it. Are you seeing take up from sort of everybody else involved in the transaction? So solicitors, the conveyancers, and maybe even sort of finance people that are using it. But are there other people using it within the sector?
Yes, there are, and I'll give you a kind of a good example of how that sequence works. So we work with some house builders, for example, and they create the logbooks for the properties that they're selling. But what then happens, their conveyancers who are representing that builder are accessing the logbooks as well, uploading information, putting there all the conveyancing information. And this is where we see it really interesting. So two different things can happen here, depending on the seller. They will either be selling through an estate agency, so they give control to the estate agent to give potential buyers access to a logbook.
Right.
So the agent's in absolute control of this process. And then the conveyancers, the builders' lawyers, what they're doing is they're then giving the buyers' lawyers access to the information within the logbook. So there, in one transaction, you've got multiple parties sharing access of information to that logbook. What then we find happens is where someone receives that information, they go, oh, this is interesting because it's quick, it's easy, and I've got everything I need. And that leads then to other people coming to us and saying, oh, can we trial this? Can we have a look at it? Can we try it? The finance sector is an interesting one. It's slightly more difficult because of their requirements. A lot of their requirements, especially at the lending sector end of the spectrum, is very much around risk, because they're managing risk. They're providing a mortgage against it. So I've got to be very careful about what a logbook can do and not do. I wouldn't want to oversell it, as you might say. It benefits estate agents, house builders, conveyancers, and buyers and sellers. Very simple, done. When it comes to the market of not so much brokers but lenders, we're not in that space. There are very specific, unique tools that lenders need, and we don't sit in that space.
Okay. No, well, that's good, because I mean, again, on the other side of that discussion is it benefits the consumer more than it does the sort of banks and anybody else sitting on top of a transaction. So I suppose that's what it's all about. The banks always seem to sort of make sure that their interests are served in terms of making sure security is there for lending, etc. And as you say, it's a different risk profile. The risk that a buyer has to weigh up in their head together with their solicitor when they're buying a property is entirely different on different parameters. So this is a really interesting product, and it's obviously available for people to start to roll out and to use. I'm aware of similar products out there. How does yours stand out?
Well, good question, David. How do we stand out? The approach we've taken has always been about the life cycle of a property. Yep. So depending on who you are, the logbook benefits different people at different times, and that's been our approach. There's a lot of companies out there that are logbook type providers. In my understanding of the marketplace, a lot of them are very focused purely on the conveyance, the transaction, and that's it. They're like sales progression tools, or they capture information and fully support the conveyancing part of the process, or the sale part of the process, which is absolutely fine. Ours takes a much longer term approach to the property and how it's passed between owners, and that data stays with the property. and so it builds that historical record of the property. The second part of what we do, so for example, the logbook, we ran the 3 largest water and energy smart metering projects in Scotland. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in
Yes.
Scotland. And we use the property logbook as a smart metering platform. So you can integrate smart metering into the property logbook if you want. We've done it. As I say, the 3 largest projects that we're running in Scotland. So the problem with that, though, is smart metering, as you know, there's still a lot of problems around smart metering. The third thing about what we do is some other work that we're doing is working with the government and the sector on identity verification in the home buying and selling process. So one of the pieces of work we're doing with like GeoPlace, for example, is we set the standards for identity, but we can now link an identity, a certified identity, and this is quite important, to a property. And the distinction here, and this is an absolute no-no, is not putting the identity in with the property information. They have to be 2 separate entities. So our approach is very much looking at the whole kind of wider holistic view of someone owning a property. What are the key life events that they go through in terms of a property? Home buying and selling is one thing. Identity verification, which is increasingly important now these days, is not just property transactions being digital, but life transactions,
Yep,
if we can call it
absolutely,
that.
yeah.
There's stuff around utilities. The logbook as well is used for within social housing. So if you're a tenant, or there's an aspect around the logbook that's used to support a tenant in a property. If you, as an individual, maybe you've got 2 or 3 properties as part of your pension plan, you can use the logbook to support you there on tenancies. Now, it's not a tenancy management tool for managing a portfolio of thousands of properties. It doesn't fill that need. Again, there's a lot of other people that do that much better. And I guess the other point about ours is around the cost structure around it. You know, that's the pricing around it. There's no cost to the consumer when the owner of that property.
Yep.
So it's nice and simple for them to interpret. And very importantly, what we don't do is advertise and sell in the logbook. I know that there's a lot of kind of free options in the marketplace,
With
but
additional,
yeah, you know where I'm going on that one,
I
don't you?
know where you go. Well, yeah, it's very commonplace, isn't it? There should be a way of facilitating something at a lower cost is to try and bundle in. You know, what are they really selling is the question. But I
Yeah.
think here, I think your motivation seems to be, if I may say, a little bit more pure, in as much as you are there dedicated to try and make that process of buying and selling houses smoother and easier. And I think if anybody were to approach this, and you mentioned it's not a tenancy management tool, but at very worst, it's a place where you can store key compliance data that you need to share with the tenant, you know, things relating to the property, because paper copies are a thing of the past. We all need digital copies that we can rely on and that we can call up at a later stage, and they're always useful. And then not everybody owns a property forever. You may choose then to sell it. That then becomes key information that your solicitor needs to help them formulate contract and all sorts of inquiries in the future. So the benefits are there, and it's great to see that you guys are on top of it. What's the best way, Stuart, then, for an agent that's watching this, if they're interested? Is it to set up an introductory call with you guys and to get to know a little bit more about this?
Yeah, we can take them very simply through a quick demo so they can see what it is, have a chat. It's very, very simple. Onboarding takes, if we were onboarding a company, it takes less than 45 minutes. You know, it's that simple because it is designed to be simple for an agent. So it's about talking to us and we can take you through it. And I think it's an interesting point around this space is, what is a property logbook? You know, what does it mean to you? And getting people to understand that. So we take people through that kind of brief education process. So it makes it easier for them when they're speaking to a client, because obviously they've got to sell that to the client. So we can take them through very, very brief, quickly and simply, and say, look, this is how it's going to help you. It's going to streamline your property sale. It helps you to differentiate your service to your client. It's time saving and operational efficiency. It's secure and confidential information. it's about enhanced collaboration between the agent, the client, the conveyancer, and the other people. So we take them through those points, that education bit, and then it helps them when they're dealing with their client to sell it on to their client.
There are plenty of USPs here, and you haven't specifically mentioned it, but my agent's head is ticking away here, and I can see how this actually could be a USP for the agent in terms of when you're marketing yourself and you go into a property, turning up with the same information that everybody else has got and the same standard pitch doesn't do anybody any favors, but going in a really helpful manner and saying, look, this is what makes us slightly different. We've chosen to back this, this level of upfront disclosure, if you like, and this is a key benefit to our customers. I think it's superb, and hopefully many agents will benefit from that.
Well, I think, as I said it earlier on, David, the problem is a lot of people don't always fully appreciate what estate agents do in the background. So they get fixated on the fee, how much are you going to charge me? And they're just basing their decision on that. And I think for agents and indeed conveyancers and other people involved in the process, because it's not always quite transparent what they're doing, it gives, you're absolutely right, the agent that opportunity to help differentiate and say, yeah, we do the same as everyone else, but we also do this, we take it further. And hopefully, well, as I said, hopefully it helps the agent to then just think about building their brand as a longer term relationship with that person. It might be different people because people come and go, but it's the brand, the company, the agency that's behind it can use that to help just build that slightly longer term relationship.
That's fantastic. Stuart Young from Etive, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David. I enjoyed that. It was good.